ready to get down to business? Join seasoned entrepreneur, community leader, and Army veteran Scott Shalom Klein, who will take you behind the scenes with those who work in America's small business scene and speak with leaders making an impact, creating jobs, and telling their story in entrepreneurship. So let's get down to business. On AM 560, The Answer, here's your host, Shalom Klein.
And indeed, we're all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship and business. We talk a lot about business here. You're on with Get Down to Business, and I'm your host, Shalom Klein. Remember, you can always download podcasts on my website at syklein.com. And while you are there, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Shalom Klein. It's going to be a jam-packed week of content and information you will not want to miss. So let's jump right in. Today's conversation we're going to kick off with is super exciting to me. Many of our listeners know I'm an avid traveler, both on the personal side as well as some of my journeys, both in work as well as in the Army, brought me to a lot of places, but not as many as our guest. Boris Kester is an author, a fearless adventurer. He is a senior purser, an avid sportsman, programmer, and political science. He is one of about 250 people worldwide to have traveled, listen to this, to every country in the world. It's absolutely crazy. Boris ranks among the best traveled people on the planet. He's the author of a brand new book, which we are going to talk about in just a moment. Boris Kester, it's an honor to have you on the program. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Shalom, for having me. And thanks for inviting me. Really looking forward to the next, 10 minutes. So let's get started.
Absolutely. We won't even have time for a second for each of these countries that you visited. 193 countries in the world, and you have visited them all. Boris, really, really excited. So what made you decide to visit all countries in the world?
Well, it started when I was 5 months old, and my parents took me traveling. I wasn't really aware of it. I mean, I couldn't talk, I couldn't walk, but I was already traveling, and we basically never stopped. So when I was a little bit older, I always kept track of the countries I've been to. So I was basically counting the countries. And then later, when I was an adult, I started traveling by myself. I always made sure to go to countries I hadn't been to before. So, you're not born with the desire to visit every country in the world, but it just grows on you. So it was when I had visited like 117 countries that I suddenly decided, like, you know what? Why don't I just go for them all? And it still seemed pretty daunting back then because I had countries like Afghanistan and Iraq and Somalia on the list where I had to go. So, but yeah.
Well, perfect segue, Boris. I'm curious. I know our listeners will be wondering, what was the hardest country to visit? Was it one of those that you just named?
Nope. No. For me, the hardest country to visit was Equatorial Guinea. Now, your readers might not know where that is. It's in basically Central Africa, on the western side, and it was hard for me because it's like it was next to impossible to get a visa. So it took a lot of effort to get the visa, and then again, it took a lot of additional effort to actually cross the border, because even with the visa in hand, it was like a nightmare to get in. Now, this is depending on your nationality. I think they just skipped it, or they just abolished it. But until recently, for instance, U.S. passport holders could get in for without a visa at all. So for them, Equatorial Guinea was super easy.
Wild. I'm chatting with Boris Kester, who again is ranked as among the best traveled people on the planet. He's visited every one of the 193 countries around the globe, and he writes about his travel adventures, his stories, and there's a lot of them. We'll have a couple of minutes to talk about some of them, as well as some photos on his website, traveladventures.org. But he's also written a book. Before we get to the book, Boris, I mean, you've visited all countries in the world. So what's next for you?
You mean in terms of travel?
Yeah.
There's still so many. Actually, the list of places I want to go to is only growing. It's not shrinking. So no. My life will be too short to do and see everything I want to do. So basically, my travel is fueled by curiosity, and curiosity doesn't die. So I may have visited every country, but it doesn't mean I can't revisit them. And Oh my God, there's so many places I want to see before, maybe before I'm not able to travel anymore. So
Yeah. Yeah, I talk about that
and
with my wife all the time. We've been fortunate to travel many places, and there's definitely places on the list that we're like, great, we saw it, it's fantastic, had a glimpse of it, and we're good. But then there's places that it only sort of makes you itch to want to see more and explore more, and wish you had more time, and it's time to book that next trip. And you write about your stories. It's a fantastic, fantastic read. What's your book called, and what should our listeners expect if they picked up a copy?
so my book is called The Long Road to Colorville. Shortly, if you want, I will explain the title.
Please.
It is I do not describe every country in the world because I simply don't believe you can do justice to countries by putting nearly 200 countries in one book. But so I concentrate on 16 stories, which are just those stories that I would tell at a birthday party or when people are curious. And the underlying theme is basically the answer to a question that many people ask me, like, aren't you insane to visit all those dangerous places? And so I'm basically looking into like what was really dangerous and what went wrong, what went right, because you always have expectations before going somewhere, and then reality on the ground can be totally different. So so my book is basically an answer to that. Um, and I do so through stories from Yemen, from Afghanistan, from the Central African Republic, from the South Pacific, and other countries and other regions.
Absolutely. Again, chatting with Boris Kester, the author of The Long Road to Culleville, Stories from My Travels to Every Country in the World. Boris, I love to hear stories from people like yourself, but I know you talk in the book about meeting some pretty amazing people along the way. Who is the most memorable person you've met on your travels?
Oh wow, um, that's like that's such a difficult question because I met so many people. Look, my preferred way of travel is to do it independently, which basically means that I mostly travel either with just by myself or with my partner. And when you do so, you meet so many people. So well, let's say one guy that comes to mind right now is someone I met in on a small island in Kiribati in the South Pacific, who made me rethink geography because he was asking me questions about my country, which he had never heard of. And it made me realize that his world was so completely different from mine. So he kind of opened my mind. And yeah, it was a very interesting, I mean, hard to explain in just in just a short while, but I actually describe him in my book. So if you read the relevant chapter on the South Pacific, you'll read the story.
Well, we're definitely going to get to making sure our listeners find your book and get on your website because you've got so much information and so many amazing, inspiring stories. And I know that there's fellow avid travelers, both interested in the business side of things, small business, entrepreneurship, and the opportunities that happen when you become sort of that global entrepreneur, but also people that want to do it for fun. So I'm curious in both of those categories. I mean, Boris, what advice would you have for fellow travelers that maybe want to see the entire world? Any lessons learned that you can maybe save us time and avoid some of those mistakes that perhaps you made along the way too?
I think my first advice would be to take it slow. I mean, I'm involved in a few communities, and I see some people, let's say, chasing every country. So they're also trying to visit every country in the world. And sometimes I see people traveling, like staying one day here, one day there, and then ticking off countries like a few in a week. And I mean, I can understand it from a point of efficiency, and you want to do it fast. But on the other hand, it also means that you lose out on so much. So, so my advice, my primary advice would be to not make the goal drive you too much, and to just concentrate on what you're actually seeing and doing instead of racing through all those countries, because you most of those countries, actually all the countries, deserve more of your time.
Yeah, that's great advice. Absolutely. That's great advice. And I mean, I think that anybody that reads your stories will understand that you've dove in, and as you said earlier, you want to do even more of it. Boris, we're just about out of time, and I want to make sure our listeners can get in touch with you and find your website and, of course, your book. How can they do that?
So they can follow me on my website, boriskester.com. They can sign up to the mailing list, so you get regular updates on new developments. I'm actually working on the second book. And you can follow me in social media. Just search for Boris Kester, and surely you'll find me on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and other channels.
Oh, fantastic. Boris Kester, really enjoyed our conversation. Can't wait to bring you on for the second book and, of course, follow your journeys. We're going to squeeze in a quick break here and get down to business. Don't touch that dial. You're listening to the show all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship.